and welcome to the Art of Decluttering podcast. I'm your slightly sick, bit croaky host, Amy Revell. I've been putting off all week recording this episode because I was hoping that my voice would kind of enter back into normal land. But alas, it is still croaky, as you can hear, and a bit asthma-y. So I appreciate you sticking with me, even though today you're going to have a bit of a different voice to Amy. I'm actually feeling not too bad. Often when you get a cold, it's always the last thing to come good. I thought today I'd explain to you a couple of things about the podcast. You might wonder, how in the world do I decide what an episode is going to be? How long in advance do I plan it, etc., etc.? I find that most of my podcast episode thoughts, titles, concepts, ideas, topics come to me in the most random of times. And so what I do is I email myself when I think of a podcast topic. So today's podcast topic is Room to Bloom. And I emailed that to myself in the middle of the night. And I simply just put in the header, Room to Bloom. And then in the email, I said to myself, when you clear a room, what will bloom? So that was my 3 a.m. musings. But as I've thought about it more, I thought, actually, this is a really cool topic to talk about because I think sometimes when we don't have a purpose for the decluttering, or we don't kind of know why we're going to do it, it can, a little bit like we talked about in the vacuum effect, is that you can do the decluttering, but if you don't have a purpose, that space just kind of gets filled again. And kind of in the converse, I think that's the right word, in a different way, let's go with that, Room to Bloom is actually about saying, okay, once I'm clearing this space, what am I creating space for? And is there something in my life that I'm wanting that space to bloom? I'm wanting that characteristic to bloom. I'm wanting that activity to bloom. And so I'm going to create room for that so that it can bloom. Sometimes when I'm gardening, I'll notice that a plant is kind of busting out of its pot. And sometimes what it needs is it actually needs room in order to bloom. So the roots need a bit of space, it needs more soil, more nutrients, it needs that room in order to bloom. And so I thought we would go at the idea of decluttering today around some different areas in your life that you might like to bloom in that could be motivation for you to create room. So I thought I'd start off with exercise, because I find that a lot of clients talk to me about how that's something that when the house is really cluttered and they're feeling stressed and overwhelmed and there's a lot on their plate, exercise and movement is something that does fall by the wayside. And there might be an exercise machine in a spare room, or there might be yoga equipment or Pilates equipment, and the intention is there to do it, but that area of their life is not blooming. But maybe if you created a room for it, it would. So it might be that you want to create space in a spare room or in your office or somewhere in your house that you intentionally set aside for exercise. So that literally might be as simple as somewhere where you can lay out a Pilates mat and you've got some weights and different things so that it's easy to use it. And it might be that if you do, maybe you work out watching something on YouTube, you could put a little TV in that space. So all you have to do when you're ready to work out is go into that space and just do your thing. It might be that it means that your bike is easily accessible and your bike helmet and your bike lock and your bike shoes and all of that. How do you create room for that so that the desire that you have to be someone who moves and exercises has space to bloom? Another area that I see a lot with my clients is around creativity. So there might be painting or sewing, doing kind of craft. And so you might feel that, yes, doing craft is something you're really passionate about, something you would love to do, you enjoy it. But what you find is you don't do it at the moment because it's too much work to pull it all out, set it all up, and you've got no space to leave it out. That's often what crafters say to me is yeah, it's fine that I can pull it out. And yes, I can use the kitchen table, but I need somewhere to leave it out because things need to dry, or I'm halfway through a project, or I want to go back to it tomorrow and it's really annoying to pack the whole thing up. So maybe in order to bloom in your craft and creativity, you actually need to create the room to engage in that activity in the way that you want to. So it is somewhere that you can leave stuff out without it looking really, really messy. Another thing that I hear clients talk about is self-expression. And it's more activity based. So it might be music or gaming, might be puzzles. So it's an area that you want to have specifically, it's hard to talk when you've got a cold, specifically set aside so that you can do something like music, like a music room. And it might be that the music room has guitars on the wall and a piano in the corner, and it might double as another space. What I'm not saying is room to bloom means that you need to have a whole room in your house specifically just for your Pilates. But how do you create room? Not a room, not a whole room, but how do you create space and a room for these things to bloom? So gaming, like if you love your gaming, but you feel like it's always a bit messy and you've got to put things away, could you set up a little desk somewhere with a screen and a chair that you love that you can game and do the thing that you love without feeling guilty like it's taking over the house, or without neglecting it because you actually don't have that room to bloom in that thing? And it could be gaming, it could be music, it could be doing puzzles. It might just be that you have a puzzle mat that you can bring out, that you've got somewhere that you can rest it. I've got one that's very close to home. We're going to jump to a quick break and then I'm going to come back and tell you what I made room for to bloom. I've got two specifically that I've done over the years that I think you'll be interested to hear about. All right, see you in a second. For me, the first time I made room to bloom that was really significant was when I started a home business. So some of you will know that I used to run a kids' party supply business, and it was an online business, but all the stock was at my house. And so I created a room for that. So we actually set aside an entire room in our house. When we bought this house, it had 4 bedrooms. We only needed 3. And so we set aside that for a small business, and it gave me room to bloom in the business. And I had space to go in and pack orders and take photos and do all of the things that I love doing. I used to love going in there and doing stock take and getting new stock in. Like, I loved that space, and it gave me space to really bloom in that business. And then a couple of years after that, Cal and I decided that we were going to look into becoming foster carers. That was something that aligned with our family values, and one of our boys had really wanted to do that, and he has a beautiful heart for people less fortunate. And so we went down the foster care route, and what that meant is we needed to create room to bloom in that. And so what we did is we actually sold the kids' party supply business because that was taking up the spare room. We sold that business so that we had room to become foster carers. And so we set it up with 2 beds and a cot and nappies in every size and clothes in every size and all of the things that we needed to be foster carers. And so that room was set up so that whenever we got a call, there was space, there was room that we could welcome a foster child into our home. Fast forward another couple of years, and we had taken over pastoring a church. And the church that we took over pastoring didn't have a church office. We were just meeting in a community centre. And so Cal was then full-time working there and didn't have an office. And so he needed room to bloom. And so what we did is we turned the foster care room, which we were no longer doing, into his home office. And we set it up beautifully for him. His books are in there. He's got a desk set up and he's got space to do the things he loves. And that was his space to bloom and do and focus on what was important. Now, we also, because he loves his music, have got in his room a piano and some guitars and his amps. So there's also within that space room for him to pick up a guitar and play when he wants to, or sit at the piano and play. And so we're really intentional about the way that we use different spaces. So they're ones that were specific to me. Here's some more that you might be interested in. So maybe you love baking, but you feel like you kind of don't ever bake because it just takes up so much space in the kitchen for all of the pots and the pans and the accessories and the decoration things and everything. Maybe what you actually need is a tub of baking supplies, like special baking, that you keep somewhere else. You might keep it in the laundry cupboard. You might keep it in the spare room. You might keep it under a bed. And so when you want to do baking, you can bring out that tub. So instead of it being, cluttered into the kitchen, when you want to make room to bloom in a baking capacity, you actually bring that out and then you've got space. You can pull it out, use all the space that you need, and then pack it away when you're done. One room to bloom that I loved doing, it was probably about 5 years ago now, is I was working with a client, so single parent. She was in a 3 bedroom house. Her daughter had 1 bedroom and she had another. And she was a fashionista. Loved clothes, loved fashion, loved shoes, loved handbags. It was really her thing. And so we did a huge declutter of those to get rid of the things that, didn't work for her anymore. And then what we did is we turned what was then kind of the junk room, so their 3rd bedroom, into a dressing room. And we made the whole room all about clothes and shoes and bags. And she actually had opportunity then to bloom in her love for fashion because she could see everything. There wasn't things hidden at the back. She could see all the clothes that she loved. We created a shoe wall. So we set up bookshelves up one whole wall of the room and had all of her shoes on display. Previously, there'd been some in the garage, some under the bed, they'd been everywhere. And even though some people would say, that's a waste of a room, for her, it was the perfect space, the perfect way to use that room because she wanted to bloom in that area. That was something she wanted to spend time on, something she enjoyed. And then setting that up just gave her really great joy. I want you to have a think about what is it that you want to bloom in. Do you want to start a business? Do you want your kids to have a playroom so that they can have a space of their own and be creative and, go in there and have quiet time? If you've got kids with sensory issues, you need a space in your house that's actually a quiet space so that when they're feeling overwhelmed, they can go in there and have the room to quieten themselves, to reduce that sensory input and come out a bloomed child. Maybe it is that you want to bake or be a foster carer or play music or paint or do Pilates. Whatever it is, have a think about what does that investment look like for you to have room in your home to do that. Remember, it doesn't have to be a whole room. It might be a space. It might be a corner of a room. It might be one room that serves multiple functions. But have a think, how can I set up my home so that in the areas that I'm passionate about and I want to bloom, I'm creating that space? I hope that's helpful. My voice has somewhat held out. I will look forward to being back with you next week, hopefully without a cold. But I am, super glad that you've joined me today. Thank you. And if you haven't seen the videos that have started popping up on Instagram and Facebook, I've created some really fun videos around decluttering and organising. So make sure you pop over there, follow and like so that you can see and you don't miss out on any of the videos. And until next week, enjoy the freedom. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land this podcast is recorded on. I would also like to pay respects to their elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love you to rate and review the show on your podcast app. That will help others to find the Art of Decluttering podcast as well. If you'd like any more information, you can visit theartofdecluttering.com.au, and I would love to see you in my Facebook group. Just search the Art of Decluttering community on Facebook and join today. I hope that you have an incredible rest of your day and enjoy the freedom.